we give people a test. And here's where the concern is. Does the test really capture a person's true mental age? Now, we simply multiply this by 100 to eliminate any decimals, and then it comes out IQ. So how does this work? Let's say that we had a 10-year-old. So we got put a 10 here for the 10-year-old, and the 10-year-old scores like other 10-year-olds, has an average score for 10-year-olds when we give them a test. And so we would then multiply that by 100, and you would see that the person's IQ would turn out to be 100. And that's what we consider average IQ. Let's say we had a 10-year-old who took the test and scored like 12-year-olds. So then we would multiply that by 100, and you would see that we would end up with a 120 IQ, which would mean that the person would have an above average IQ. Let's say we had a 10-year-old, but unfortunately that 10-year-old scored like typical 8-year-olds, and you can see when we multiply that by 100, then the person's IQ would end up being 80, so obviously below average. So for test purposes, what I would like for you to know is, what are the components? Let me know that you understand the components of this IQ, the formula that we use for IQ. Now, you don't have to get into the question of whether this is valid, the type of testing and calculation that we do is valid, but I'd like for you to know the components. What do we mean by CA? What do we mean by MA? And then how does this result in IQ? And obviously what happens here, the statement that you need to make, is that we divide the mental age by the chronological age, we multiply that by 100, and then that ends up to be IQ. And I'd like for you to recognize that what we mean by IQ is intelligence quotient. So be sure not to simply use the letters, but let me know that you know that CA means chronological age, and what do we mean by chronological age? How old the person is in years. MA means mental age. How do we determine the mental age? We give people a test, a paper and pencil test. Now we do it on computers. We multiply that by 100 once we divide, and then that results in the intelligence quotient, the IQ. So again, for test purposes, I'd like for you to be able to come up with the components, and let me know that you understand how these components sort of fit together to determine IQ. We said we leave out number 8. We said we leave out number 9. Actually, we sort of jumped ahead a little bit in class, so we already covered number 10, but let me go ahead and do it again. Remember, this was Shannon's question, and Shannon had actually come and we had chatted a little bit about the second part of this question before class. But if you'll remember, artificial intelligence. What we mean by artificial intelligence is whenever we use computers, basically, machines of some type, but obviously those machines are usually computers. When we use computers to do the type of things that cognitively, in terms of thinking, that at one time we attributed to humans, that humans did those things. And this is in terms of problem solving, in terms of analysis, and obviously we have become very, very dependent upon these thinking machines, these computers. So this is what we mean by artificial intelligence. When we use machines, specifically computers, to think, to problem solve in a way that typically that humans did. Now obviously there are many benefits to this. The smartphone that you have in many ways does a lot of the thinking that you would have done individually before. In industry, the production lines now are run by computerized devices that take a lot of the problem solving, a lot of the thinking out of the process that was done by humans at one time. Little robots are able to problem solve and to do a type of thinking that we at one time attributed to humans. So this is what we mean by artificial intelligence. So many benefits, but obviously the downside is, and let me sort of do a little pep talk here. The downside is that these computerized devices are launching us into a technical world that in many cases sort of takes the place of things that humans did at one time. For instance, as I said, in union, many of the jobs that were done at one time manually are now done in a way that is controlled by a computerized device. And so those people have been supplanted by this sort of artificial intelligence that we have developed and utilized. So this is sort of the downside. You know, again, sort of the pep talk. This is why it is so critical. And speaking of technical devices, I forgot to turn my phone off, so I apologize. Speaking of technical devices, we are really reliant on these technical devices, and many times these technical devices sort of take the place of humans. And this is why it is so important that you, in your educational career, prepare yourself for this new world that requires skills that are most often imparted to a person during the course of their college, in the course of their higher education. So once again, a little pep talk on why it's so important for you to do well in your college studies, not related to the test. Okay, we said we'd leave out number 11. We said we'd leave out number 12. Let's move on to chapter 10. And chapter 10 is the chapter on motivation and emotion. And let's go through the vocabulary. And you'll see on page 321, we have the definition of motivation. And let me run through these quickly. Internal processes that initiate, sustain, and direct activities. And usually when we think of motivation, we're focusing on the direct activities aspect of this. That motivation is a process that sort of directs our activities, that sort of gets us energized and sort of moves us, that we're motivated. So I'd like for you to focus on the direct activities when you think of this particular definition. One of the processes that influences motivation is what's referred to as a drive. And you can see the definition here, the physiological expression of internal needs or valued goals, for instance, hunger, thirst, and the drive for success. So some things inside of us push us so much that we refer to it as a drive, that we have to move, we have to get energized, we have to be directed in a certain way. And this is referred to as a drive. Now, obviously, one of the simplest ways of looking at a drive is the hunger drive. We get hungry, and we are driven to look for food. And we're going to refer to that later when we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The term homeostasis on page 321 we have looked at before, and well, actually, it's not on page 321. Where's on page 323? I'm sorry. On page 323, a steady state of bodily equilibrium. Now, obviously, this was an important term also when we were looking at the nervous system. This balanced state, this state that our bodies and our nervous system tries to stay in, when that balance gets upset, then this can lead to motivation, the motivation to reestablish that balance. On page 323 also, One of the things that's very important in terms of motivation is what's called a circadian rhythm, cyclical changes in bodily functions and arousal levels that vary on a schedule approximating a 24-hour day. Now, the most obvious circadian rhythm is our sleep-wake cycle that is set up on approximately a 24-hour cycle. Now, how does this fit into motivation? Obviously, this circadian rhythm then influences us to need to go to sleep at a particular time. And if you really want to see the effects of the circadian rhythm, all you have to do is travel across time zones, and then that will sort of let you know that your body does have these circadian rhythms. And once that circadian rhythm is upset, then homeostasis gets upset, and that's where the drive, that's where the motivation comes into play. Okay, we said we'd leave out, no, I didn't say we'd leave out, but let's leave out hypothalamus and move on to anorexia nervosa on page 329. Obviously, hunger is a very important drive, and anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa are related to this hunger drive. And obviously, in anorexia nervosa, you can see active self-starvation or sustained loss of appetite that has psychological origins. So with anorexia nervosa, people self-starve themselves until, in many cases, that hunger drive sort of diminishes to the point that they don't want to eat anymore. Unfortunately, your age group, especially the girls in your age group, are many times susceptible to anorexia nervosa because of social pressures, because of peer pressure, and so on and so forth. And it is of psychological origin, as the definition said, but the consequences are very physiological and many times can be very, very dire. And then bulimia nervosa, the difference is, and this is on page 331, excessive eating usually followed by self-induced vomiting and or taking laxatives. So the difference is with bulimia nervosa is that the person eats too much, and then they feel guilty about it, and then they want to get rid of it. That's why it's called the binge purge syndrome. They eat too much, they want to get rid of it, and so they use laxatives, they run their finger down their throat, whatever, to get rid of this excessive food that they ate. This upsets homeostatic balance and can be rather dangerous. Anorexia nervosa is usually a condition that affects people in their teenage years. Bulimia nervosa is more characteristic, this illness, condition of young adulthood. Now, it doesn't always have to be those age groups, but this is usually where the divide falls. The sex drive, I don't think that I would have to say too much about the sex drive. We all know about this. The strengths of one's motivation to engage in sexual behavior. And obviously, in humans, as in other species, a very, very strong form of motivation or drive. Leave out need for achievement. On page 339, the term intrinsic motivation. And you can see intrinsic motivation is defined as motivation that comes from within rather than from external rewards. Motivation based on personal enjoyment of a task or activity.